All right, so we're going to ask everybody to get your phones out and go to Flint Public Health Youth Academy on Facebook and share the screen. And let's get this show popping. So welcome everybody out there in social media land. We are the Flint Public Health Youth Academy, again with another outstanding and dynamic show for today. We're excited to first of all have our wonderful panelists and our public health interns here, as long with some of our mentors. And we're going to have a very engaging conversation to understand not only the Latinx and the Hispanic community's perspective, but also to hear directly from their voices concerning a plethora of issues around social justice, health, government, you name it. I mean, the floor is open. We have some dynamic young interns today who will facilitate today's conversation. Tomas, we have Cruz, and we have Amir. And so we're excited to get ready to just kind of dive into this show and to get everything popping. And if you have any comments out in social media land, make sure that you put them on our page. And for those who are a part of the actual Zoom audience, and that link is also on our social media, you can put your information in the Q&A. All right, so Tomas, I'm gonna pass the baton to you and let's get this party started.
Hello, everybody. I hope everything is going well today. So me, my fellow Flint Public Health Youth Academy colleagues, Cruz and Amir and myself will be asking some questions to some of our Latino panelists here with us today, regarding some issues that impact us. Some issues you might have heard of before, but many of them you may have not heard of, but hopefully we can spread the message and educate. That's what we're supposed to do as brown and black people. We're supposed to educate each other so we know how to have each other's backs and have examples and know how to, following each other's path. That's what it's about. It's about leadership, and especially us here in Flint, giving our perspective. But anyhow, I'm gonna give it to my fellow colleague Cruz to start off the questions for us today. Thank you.
Yep. So I'm gonna start with the question. Did you feel in touch with your culture growing up?
That's a great question. I'm gonna pass it to Alondra.
All right. I grew up in Ohio, and I was in a predominantly white school district. So I was usually the only Mexican in my classes. So I grew up with a lot of white friends. And at that time, Ohio didn't really have a lot of activities that involved my culture. So I felt very confused. I would go to school, I would speak English, and then I would come home and speak Spanish, a whole 180 flip from trying to assimilate to the American culture and then coming home and being Mexican again. So it wasn't until I came here to Michigan and I got involved in the Youth Mariachi in Flint, and I got involved in the Latinx Technology and Community Center that I was like, wow, I found my community, people that speak my language, that listen to the same music, the food, my culture. It was like everything came together in one.
Go ahead, Vanessa, take it away.
So I kind of have a similar situation with Alondra. So I was born in Mexico, and I came to the United States when I was about 4 years old. So that was a really drastic change of what I saw going on in the outside world. So pretty much when I was at home, like she said, I spoke Spanish. I ate my food, I had my culture, I had all of these things. But then once I crossed this certain threshold, it was very evident that it was really, really different, and I had to disimular. Is it disimular, anyone in English? Oh my God, I'm forgetting it. But yeah, so I had to kind of put on this whole act or something that I was something else in public. I had to speak English. I had to follow the rules that Americans usually kind of follow. But again, like I said, when I went back home, I was free to kind of be myself and to do any of the cultural things that I really wanted to. But again, it was very confined within just my home, or a couple of other families that I kind of knew that we would be able to kind of interact with each other. But yeah, so Asa.
Cruz, that's a fantastic question, and I'm glad you asked it because it's such a interesting experience. Just like Alondra and Vanessa were mentioning, and then even my experience as well was, completely just as I learn more and as I just reflect even more upon my experience growing up, it's a lot more telling of what was happening and what I was experiencing. But I would say for it's weird because as I was growing up until I got my degree from the university, I felt as if I did not know much. Well, I felt as if I was not as connected to my culture as I was, right? I thought I didn't know enough about my culture. It's this weird dynamic, right, where you're growing up in the United States, and you don't really feel like, for me anyway, I was born here, a little bit different than our other two panelists, right? I don't really feel like I'm specifically could say Mexican because I have never been to Mexico. I didn't speak Spanish, didn't know much about it besides what my family had taught me over the generations. And then at the same time, I never felt like an American. Nobody had ever treated me as if I was an American. They have always treated me as if I was the other, right? As if I was Mexican. But after I got my degree, right, I had moved to Mexico because I was so curious to learn more about my own culture. And I moved to Mexico, and I'm really blown away because it's like, man, I had thought I was so disconnected, but everything I had learned here, everything I'm experiencing here is really telling that my whole life, right? My whole life, I've been Mexican, right? I've been practicing these things that are so rooted in the culture that I did not know. And that's what's so beautiful, right? To have that experience, I'm grateful for, right? To be able to go to Mexico and live there for a year. But while I was there, just to see so many different things that we practice, that, that just get lost, right? We are denied, as communities of color and as marginalized community, we are denied education about ourselves, denied education about our culture, and to experience it firsthand, it's like, wow, I'm a lot more connected than I thought I was. But growing up, it was this weird dichotomy where I felt like I was neither. So absolutely, great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel as if I have a similar experience. It's not the same, of course, but I've always, as growing up, I've always had this strange scenario where it's almost like I feel attached to my African roots, but I don't really know what that's like. And so I feel like we can draw a little small connection there. But how does Spanish colonization affect brown people today?
Go ahead, Asa.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm gonna pass it to Vanessa real quick, see if she want to go. I'll be happy to speak. I'll be happy to talk about it.
You go first, and we'll piggyback off of you.
I'll help out if you want.
Thomas, go ahead. Go take us off, and I'll go after you, Thomas. Right? I want to make sure.
Well, I really think that I know we're having a lot of changes right now with how we're going to identify and label ourselves, and I don't necessarily get offended when I hear someone say, yo, they're Hispanic or Latino, but I would say that's one of the first largest kind of examples of how Spanish colonization is still prevalent within our raza is the term Hispanic. Now, Hispanic refers to somebody who is a a descendant of a Spanish colonizer, right? And that is true, but it just says only a Spanish colonizer, Spanish colonization. It denies the whole, like when people think, for example, and I'm gonna kind of verge off, when they think of like indigenous people in South and Central and North America, they just think of, like Aztec, Maya, and the Inca. And that is true. Those were the large ones. But just as there were those types of people, we have, the Mexica people, the Olmec people, the Toltec people, the Tabasco people, and we even have some of the remains still today that kind of show. But I want to save some of the conversation for later. I want to add on, but basically that prior to colonization, our people had knowledge. But anyhow, I'm veering off topic. So, like I said, Hispanic totally denies the indigenous culture within us because we're like a melting pot. We're each our own melting pot of different cultures and roots, us Latino people. We're walking Americas, basically. But anyhow, I'd say with the term Latino, Latin refers to Romance languages, Portuguese, French, and Spanish. So once again, that kind of still puts that in your head that, I feel like you were colonized and this and that, and just further kind of throws it in your face, But we're trying to make some edits and changes as a community to try and better identify ourselves. I prefer, you know, sometimes just being called a Chicano, Mexican American, or a brown person. You know, I prefer that. You know, but also I would say, if you really want to know a large example, just look at the little to the left of my screen, right there, where it says Tomás Teo, Asa Zucarro, Alondra Rosas, Vanessa Alvarez. All of those Spanish names. Our culture, Spanish. So the colonization was really forced into us. You know, like that's what we speak, and that's what we refer to as raza and culture is through Spanish. Raza is a Spanish word. You know, so I would really just say that colonization is prevalent through our titles and through our languages, our names. Everything resembles and goes back to Spain. Not all of our culture, but you know, it's really prevalent. You know, like some of our music, for example. But Asa, you like to?
Absolutely. No, I said Thomas really just lay down one of the most important parts of talking about this, right? Is this colonization, and even just the term, right? So first off, this was a term given to our community by the government, right? And then at that time, when it was given, the people, our community had spoken and said, no, we prefer the term Chicano, and they said, no, we're gonna call you Hispanic. And right, Hispanic is this Latin word, right? This root Latin word for Española, which literally means Spaniard, right? Spaniard. Like I said, my ancestry is from Mexico. I've never been to Spain. I do not connect with Spain itself, but to call me Spaniard, it seems a little ridiculous to call me by a colonizer's name. So, and just like Thomas was saying, right, we're trying to find what is a better term to identify our population. And you know, it's real complex too, just because, right, the people that identify as the same community is so diverse. Right now, our organization's name is called the Latinx, the Technology and Community Center, right? The Latinx or Latinx, right? It's got the X for gender inclusive and this Latin to refer to all of Latin America. But just like Tomas said, if he had to identify himself, if I had to identify myself, I always use Chicano as well, right? If we know what these terms mean, Chicano means, right? I am a person of this Latin descent, but I grew up, I have this experience of living in the United States, right? That's very meaningful, because we know that not everybody has the same experience of living in the United States, especially if you're a person of color, right? So the Chicano refers to that, and it also refers to, right, I am this mixture of indigenous, Spanish, and African roots, right? And that's the thing that I think is really missing when we talk about what is so damaging about talking about the Hispanic colonization. Is a lot of the focus always goes to Spain, right? When we talk about the culture that's celebrated, a lot of it is always, there's this huge focus on Spain and the culture that they brought to Latin America. But, you know, some of it is missing when it's talking about what are these indigenous roots in our culture? What are these African roots in our culture? And those are the things at the center that I love to focus on, because when we look at our food, there's nothing that we eat that does not have a connection to Africa or a connection to indigenous roots. When we look at our music, like all the music that we know, there is no way you can separate that from indigenous or African roots. So I would say that's just the biggest damaging thing, is this loss of education of how beautiful the culture is and where these things stem from that makes it so great.
Yeah, just one thing to add to that. What I noticed in myself, we went to Cancun and we went to Chichen Itza, and I saw how, you know, these groups, indigenous, they have their own language, they have their own artwork, they have, like, it's just absolutely amazing. And I realized just how not divided, but how unaware I was of, within my own country, within my own culture, I was not educated enough on that beautiful side of what is Mexico. So
yeah, so I want to say, every time I think of colonization, I think the biggest thing that kind of comes to my mind, at least you know, kind of growing up and like learning a little bit more about it, is colorism, and how that really affected how us as Latinos, we see each other. Because like Asa had mentioned, there are so many of us there that we can't, it's kind of hard to identify us within one term. But then once you add colorism to it, then you're separating a whole nother, you're putting another separation or barrier of what Latinos are. So then, you know, Afro-Latinos really become non-existent, or no one really recognizes them as being a Latino or puts them in a separate category. And then, so that just kind of makes it hard for us to even have a conversation of like, how can we move forward? How can we include everyone if we're still excluding others because of something that happened a long time ago with colonization, where Spaniards made Africans and made all of the native people feel really inferior and that they didn't really count or that they weren't worth being called Latino. So that's really something that that is always in my mind of like how colonization or how really the beginning or origins, right, of our Latino-ness kind of starts. But yeah.
Absolutely. And just to add one more thing before we go to the next question, another beautiful thing that I love that is just not talked about is how right, indigenous culture was able to literally transform or shift, right, this Hispanic culture. And you know, that's not talked about enough. It's like right, the indigenous culture, right, transformed and shifted the dominant culture, and that's something that should be recognized. But another great question.
Yeah, well, I didn't understand or recognize how much its influence and impact the Latinx community. Moving on though, is there enough representation politically and professionally of the brown community? And in what ways do they contribute to America that are unnoticed or underappreciated?
Anybody, please, anybody, go
That's
ahead.
a hot question.
Right, because right.
Well, I'll add a little bit. Just recently seeing AOC, I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with her. I guess growing up, being in politics or being in those leadership positions never really interested me, because I never saw someone from my background being up there leading and representing. I never saw someone who looked like me. So just like recently, just like I said, AOC, seeing her and knowing that she's inspiring little Latina girls and guys and it's just really, it's needed and we need more, but it's a start for sure.
Okay, I guess I can go. Well, yeah, I mean, same thing. Politically and just professionally, I think, like anything, there's always something missing. There's a gap in, people of color in general not being represented as well. I know personally, when I was studying at the university, there wasn't any person or professor that I could look up to and say, oh, I identify the same thing as you. Like, you're the same color as me. You've come from the same background, or like anything. I couldn't really make a connection. So that was one of the things that really it bothered me, because I'm like, I'm really trying to make it in this specific field, but like Alondra said, if I don't see anyone that looks like me that I can say, oh, well, they've successfully done this, it kind of discourages me to continue. And I kind of feel like, oh, I shouldn't, maybe it's not made for me, or maybe it's not something that I can achieve or something. But then, I was like, snap out of it, because yes, you can. You made it this far, you're here. If it was anything otherwise, then like you would have been kicked out, or like they wouldn't have accepted you. So it was really about coming to myself and looking at myself and saying, well, if I can't look up to someone who is already doing it, well, maybe not to have like an ego or anything, but just to kind of say like, I could become a representation for future, like Latinos or Latinas that, want to go in the same field, or just even say, oh, well, she attained higher education, well, maybe I can too. And then kind of going off of like this political view, I think it's funny that, we're always kind of, they're always telling us, oh, it's your civic engagement. Like it's your duty to be involved. You have to do this, this, and that. But again, there's no representation. How am I supposed to connect to anyone and say, well, okay, yeah, like I totally agree. I understand what you're saying because I speak the same language or have this literature in the language that I speak. And so it's something that is attainable for me that I can participate in. So like Alondra said, like having AOC just kind of being in this position and, you know, people seeing her is very important. It's a very important win. So that like we can be able to say, well, okay, now that there's someone there that's fighting for us, for our voices to be heard, for our engagement in this political field, then maybe I can start to pay a little bit more attention. I'm a little bit more involved, and I can go out of my way to really say, well, this person is going out of their way to get my attention to be involved. So maybe I can push a little bit more of myself to be involved. And then having this actual system of like helping each other out.
Exactly what, you know, Alondra and Vanessa we're both talking about. There's literally so much that could be broken down. So much that could be broken down. And all of that is just so powerful, right? The representation of just literally seeing yourself in higher ed, one as a student, but another one as a faculty member or a professor. Absent education, representation in education, what non-existent, right? Non-existent in primary, secondary, but even at the collegiate level, right? I studied at U of Flint. They said you could major in Chicano studies. Never offered a class. I said, how? How? I've been here 6 years waiting for a class to become available. Never. I said, this seems like it doesn't exist. And to put it in perspective as well, it's like, right, right now, right, we are the Latinx community is the second largest ethnic minority. In 2000, right, it's a census year. It's 2020. It's a census year, just wrapped up. In 2000, the Census Bureau said that the Latinx population was going to quadruple in the next couple years. They said by 2050, the Latinx population will be 25% of the overall population in the United States. What? And we still have no representation? When we talk about equity and wealth for all communities of color, where's the, it doesn't correlate. It doesn't correlate. The condition of our schools, our communities, all of it. Right, so when you look at it from the grand perspective or from the macro perspective, it's clear, right? It's clear there's a huge gap of representation. Right, you can look at Congress or the Senate, right? It's overwhelmingly a particular identity that makes up these positions. And while, but you know, Vanessa hit something that was really huge, right? We're talking about even right now, tonight, we're talking about how important it was that we all got to vote. But again, who are we voting for? Why are we not voting for people that look like us or represent what is most beneficial to our communities? But powerful question. So much could be drawn from it. But there's a huge gap. There's a huge lack of representation.
And as a follow-up, in what ways does the brown community contribute to America that are unnoticed or underappreciated?
Oh, I love that question. First off, Flint specifically, right? We can definitely talk about the national level, but locally, when we talk about local history, there's so much focus on Flint, the automobile industry, but it's like, you know, there were people of color here. There were people of color working in these jobs that made these factories run. And I don't know if you know, but they had the most dangerous jobs. It's like people died. It's like, but you don't give them credit when we talk about the successes of the automobile industry or the successes of these corporations or even the success of Flint in its heyday. So that's a big one, right? My family alone has been here for 100 years. We don't talk about the history of these communities that they played. I'm gonna pass it because I don't want to. You're gonna get me going. You're gonna get me going.
Kind of just wanted to add on what Asa was saying, just the labor, you know, of Latinos and Black people and, you know, Arabic people, anybody that looks like us, that's our complexion or has, you know, different characteristics. Like, for example, I don't know if people are familiar, but around 70% of the agricultural workforce in America is composed of, you know, undocumented and documented people. Like, I know there's probably, you know, specific percentages of who's who, but basically people that aren't really welcome at all here in this country. You know, they're still paying taxes. There's a lot of myths and, you know, misconceptions going around and bad titles, you know, but my people are breaking their backs here. And, you know, luckily me, I had the, you know, I can't say I was privileged. I never had to work in the fields. I did it one time, or just so I can kind of get the experience. My godmother, she works for MSU recruiting the undocumented people, trying to encourage them to go to college. And there was this program, Living in the Shoes of a Migrant. And I said, let me take that opportunity, you know, because if I really want to speak for my raza, I need to go through it. And, you know, just a few hours, that wasn't even enough to show me the whole experience. But I could just get a little glance at what my people are going through. I would say through our labor is kind of really underappreciated, not kind of, it is underappreciated. And I would say, like I said, with the taxes, taxation without representation. Now, I know that undocumented people, for example, paid around, I don't know the exact dollar amount, ASA or somebody else could probably help me, but I know it was a couple, not maybe more than a couple $1 billion worth of taxes, but they're not receiving any benefits. And it's stated that, you know, my people are, especially undocumented people, are just, you know, oh, they're getting over on America. They're taking all the welfare, taking this and that. But no, we're not, to be honest with you. And we're not taking jobs as well, because I don't see any, you know, the certain, you know, kind of demographic that likes to kind of, what's the word? Belittle others. I don't really see them when I go to hotels working, you know, working at the continental breakfast or cleaning the bathrooms. I don't see them at the university campus. When I clock out of my work, I don't see them coming to scrub the floors extra at the end of my shift, you know. And I would also kind of say with culture too, you know, kind of like, how do I put this? Like, for example, like certain traditions that we don't really celebrate. For example, Cinco de Mayo, you know, we don't really celebrate that, but, you know, the Anglos really think, or other people in general too, really think that that is Mexican culture or whatnot, you know. But my thing is, I mean, that's fine if you're still celebrating, but how are you going to wear your big little sombrero and, you know, get your little 2 for $25 margaritas, but then build a wall, you know, and not care for the babies at the cage? You know, I find that very insulting. And in a way, it's kind of like a minstrel show. You know, like that's all you think of us is just, you know, I mean, we do party, don't get me wrong, but we're hardworking people, you know, we work for what we earn. So, you know, it's kind of like a Latino, you know, a brown minstrel show, basically. You know, you're putting brown face on, you're putting a big sombrero, thinking that's all we do is drunk and be lazy, you know, the sleeping Mexican statues and all of that. So, and that when the reality is the total opposite of that. So I just kind of find it very insulting. And it's a farce. You know how try to take our culture, make it something that it isn't, you know, or even take the elements that are, like Dia de los Muertos, people, you know, trying to make an ofrenda and stuff, and that's cool. Spread cultural awareness. I'm all for that, but make the awareness known, you know? Like, that's just all I have to say. But, thank you.
Yeah, just one thing to add. Sometimes even myself, I don't realize that plate of strawberries or that produce sitting on my table, on the dinner table, that, you know, a lot of undocumented people of color were working long hours in the sun, hours upon hours, just to get me that food into the grocery store and for me to go buy it. So sometimes, you know, even myself, I need to take a step back and realize, like, whoa, a lot happened for those strawberries to come onto my plate.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so on the census, you know, Latinos our race is considered white. So if that's not enough contribution, I don't know what is. But you know, yeah, just like everyone is saying, like there's a lot of misconceptions of what Latinos bring and do. Kind of what Tomas says. So like we're stealing a job, we're stealing everyone's jobs, but no one's doing the jobs that we're doing. So like we're paying taxes, even if we're undocumented, we're finding ways. And like he said, we're not receiving any money from that. So there's a lot of things that Latinos contribute to that there's I don't know, how do I say this? Like there's no way that people can be missing these things, because it's really seen. Like Alondra said, like if you see anything at the grocery store, you have to wonder, like, where does this come from? Who actually does these jobs? Especially like when California, when they have all these wildfires and Latinos are continuing to work these already really labored jobs, but having to continue working with the wildfires. That's something that really goes unseen, that we don't really get much media coverage to say, look, hey, these people are still working, and guess who these people are? Oh, they're Latinos. They're making up all of this work, and they're really doing everything so that we as Americans, or everyone as a whole, has access to all of these fruits and vegetables, or whatever other labors that we're contributing to.
Absolutely, right. It's been echoed, and then I'm gonna echo it again, right? Because it's important. It's important. But right, Michigan itself, I believe, is the right out of all the 50 states is the second right highest agricultural state, right? For agricultural produce, Michigan is one of the top, and I believe it's the second. And just like Thomas said, right, he visited a farm where people are working to make sure we have produce. If you have not been, check it out. It's will blow your mind. As far as you can see, it's nothing but crops. And we just, before the sun comes up until after the sun goes down, 7 days a week, there is no break. There ain't no break. And then if we know about, some civil rights leaders like Cesar Chavez himself, right? The conditions that they used to work. Cesar Chavez is no longer alive, but he would still be alive. The conditions that people were put in, they were working out there, and they said, you do not get a bathroom break. You do not get breaks, right? The pavement, right? It's the utilization for people of free labor in this country is a continuing issue, right? It's nothing that these historic issues are still prevalent today. When we're talking about people who are here undocumented, right? If you hear somebody talk, and if you are familiar with how taxes work and how immigration works, and you hear somebody's argument, you can hear all the ignorance that is in it. It's like, clearly, you know nothing of what you think you're talking about. Is because the undocumented community that you are saying is here ripping everybody off and taking, right, either your job or your tax money. It's like, literally, you can't. If you are undocumented, you cannot access any type of benefit. So argument one, done, right? And the second one is you are paying taxes, right? You're paying taxes on sales tax and anything that you're doing. And at the end of the year, and any wages that you had, you are paying taxes. But it creates a system where people can be taken advantage of and utilized for free labor. And it's so weird, right? And just given that our country is one that is heavily focused on capitalism, you would think, right, there's this weird dichotomy, right, where you're pushing, right, the people are vocal that we need to get rid of these individuals, but at the same time, they are definitely being utilized by large corporations, right? I mean, it's been proven that Donald Trump has people who is undocumented. It's known. But, right, if we just know more about immigration, know more about taxes, and know more about the history of this country, then it becomes a lot clearer, right? None of this stuff is new.
Yeah, y'all said a lot of valuable things there. One of the ones that stuck out to me is Tomas talking about cultural appropriation. Like, that's such a problem, such an issue, because people are able to sort of dismiss things through it. And yeah, after you said that it's kind of like a minstrel show, it opened my eyes. It really is. It's so disgraceful. And I'm so ashamed that America practices these practices of doing these unjust and wrongful things. Moving on to the next question. What are some of the challenges and changes that the Latinx community face while living in the United States?
I'll start off just recently with this whole COVID pandemic. At the Latinx Center, we focused to bring out information about COVID in Spanish. There was tons of information about COVID, about the pandemic, news, but it was all in English. And it's ignoring a large population of Spanish-speaking communities that they need that information as well. So that's one challenge that I've noticed so far.
Kind of my bad. No, you can go, Vanessa. Let me be.
I was going to say, the thing that always comes to my head when I think about what challenges we have to kind of overcome or we've faced is having access to our culturally relevant food. So when I first came to the United States, there wasn't really anywhere for us to go to get culturally relevant food. So we kind of had to make our own versions of our, Mexican food. And one of the things that I always remember is that we used to make quesadillas, like a very, very simple dish with American yellow cheese and flour tortillas. And that I grew up with that, so I was like, oh yeah, that's normal. Quesadillas are like this Mexican thing and stuff. And it wasn't until I got into college that my friends were like, wait, what? You make quesadillas with yellow American cheese? Like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, wait, what? Like, you guys don't do that? They're like, no. We actually have the Mexican cheese. And I was like, oh my God, like, what is wrong with me? So, just having to, everything all of our cultural aspects, we always have to kind of, I guess, water down and kind of adjust or kind of form into the resources that we have. So again, there wasn't any Mexican cheese available in Flint here like a long time ago. Like, we had to use the resources that we had. Obviously, like I said, quesadillas are super easy, super cheap to make. So, we bought the yellow cheese, that was cheap. We bought the flour tortillas and we made that, we ate that. That was delicious. But again, thinking back, I was like, wow, I can't believe there was a lack of resources that we've had that kind of made us change the way that we kind of lived our normal lives. Not only did we have to kind of assimilate into this American culture where we had a specific like I mentioned earlier, like we had to be a specific way in the real world, but then we had to come back. When we came back into our homes, we were able to do kind of what we wanted, but still, again, kind of confined with things within the things and the resources that we were able to have. So really just trying to not lose our culture, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we have, especially with like the new generations that keep coming and coming. Like not losing the language or not losing these cultural practices. They're kind of like what Asa said earlier. Having that ability to have all of this information and saying, oh yeah, guess what? This whole time I was actually doing all of these things that were part of my culture.
Yeah, quickly add.
Oh shoot, my bad. I'm cutting everybody off. Go ahead, Alondra. I'll go after you. My bad.
No, yeah, adding to what Vanessa said, I think a big part of it was coming, when we immigrate here, is finding a community where we feel safe to express our culture, to speak our language, to dance to our music, to eat our delicious foods. I think that's a big part I think that's the really scary part when anyone immigrates from Mexico, from South America. It's really scary because you're in a place where I guess you don't know if you have any allies. You don't know if you have an atmosphere where you are safe to fully express yourself. And like Vanessa says, sometimes, we find ways to include our culture here and there the best we can. But that's a huge thing for me in my story, was finding an actual community where I could relate to them, finding a friend where in the stores, I could speak Spanish to her, not English, So like little things like that.
I would say I haven't ran into the issue a lot, just sometimes, but I would say sometimes a challenge for, Latino American, I know I said about the Latino word, but just brown American people, or Mexican American, especially what I'm familiar with, is kind of like the whole exclusion sometimes. Sometimes us Mexican Americans feel kind of not sometimes prejudiced against from, our native roots, like from Mexico. Like, for example, like in the movie Selena, Abraham Quintanilla, her father was kind of explaining to her about the importance of speaking Spanish really well, and when they go to Mexico, because they're from Texas, and and that is a big thing. We're kind of looked down upon from the other Mexicans, because they're like, oh, you're Americans, and they think that we're all, sometimes snobby, and and we are privileged. We do have privileges, and there are some well, it's a whole nother story too. There are actually some people in our culture, unfortunately, who do not care about them, but that's not with me or my peers that I associate myself with. But I will say that for the majority of us, I'll speak for us. It's true. We care and we don't look down upon. Like Vanessa was saying, we try to bring our culture here with us. You know, I mean, I never been to Mexico, so I can't really say I brought my culture here, but I will say that I've kind of sometimes felt from other brown people sometimes a little excluded. Like sometimes they'll be like, oh, you don't speak Spanish. And me, I'm currently learning. I'm in Spanish too. Shout out to Senora Garcia. And with the help of the Latinx Community Center, I suggest you take it. But anyhow, like I was saying, sometimes they make me feel like I wasn't really Latino because I wasn't speaking any Spanish. But I just want to let you know out there, I overcame it, and I know it's not truth. Always remember that people only get mad about what's the truth, and you got to flip the script. Don't get mad about lies. And young brown child out there, boy, girl, whatever, or even if you're my age or older, if you feel like you're, not Latino, not brown enough, not Mexicano enough, that's a lie, because in the end, if you're down to defend and represent your culture to the best you can, that's all that matters. Me, I kind of had, a little history with going to different schools and stuff. I was mostly in Catholic private, but I will say there is really kind of where I proved to myself and proved to others that I was in allegiance with my raza, my blood, and, defending my culture, educating people, not being afraid to correct or, have this, just speak up for yourself, no matter what, defending yourself, still repping yourself, not being scared or nothing. If something is said, kind of not correct or maybe a little out of line, to the best of your abilities to correct that person and let them know. So I would say that's what makes you raza, because there's a lot of people out here who speak more Spanish than Daddy Yankee and Cardi B and Bad Bunny album combined, and Vicente Fernandez. And they're the most, like I said, the minstrel show people that you will ever meet, unfortunately. But like I said, that's just some of the population. But like I said, that's kind of sometimes the challenge as a Mexican American. We sometimes feel like we're not liked. And sometimes it's been proven, like some of my family in Texas that live by the border in the valley, they sometimes say that the Mexican people, when they come there, they treat them so rudely, they disrespect them, and they look down upon them, really kind of belittle them, And of course, a lot of Mexican Americans sometimes do that to the people down there too. So I think on both sides, we need to come to, cultural consensus and realize we're all raza no matter what. In the end, all the brown people, you're going over there no matter what. We're not more better than nobody. All they see, all the oppressor sees is that we're brown, And to be honest with you, we shouldn't have to wait for the oppressor to tell us that we're brown. We should know inside of us that we're brown. We need to unite with each other. The loss, the separations that have happened, as far as with the colonization, all of that, people being spread out. We need to bring back to that home base, of our culture, no matter what. So I just wanted to say that that's a challenge out there, and it can easily be overcome. But, well, not easily, but if you try, anything is possible. But.
So I wanted to interject real quick. So this has been like such a rich and educational moment. One, just kind of understanding, the perspective that you all are sharing with us. But when I just think about the Flint Public Health Youth Academy and what we're trying to do, we're trying to push representation of all races in critical fields such as medicine, such as public health, such as research. I mean, even beyond and health policy, that's lawyers and legal, having those legal degrees and all of that. And you guys talked about, I just kind of want to kind of give some of what you talked about, then we'll go on to the next questions, but the issue of feeling of not belonging to this country, like that is something that is also reminiscent of many African Americans who have shared that very same experience. Colorism, we know that we share that as well. Light skin versus the dark skin, especially in African American community, used to be the paper bag test. If you were lighter than the paper bag, you could work in the house. But if you were darker, you had to work in the field. Like these are things that we have dealt with for years, and that colorism thing still sticks. The lighter you are, then the more beautiful you must be, or all of those type of things that we have been indoctrinated and to accept. And then the lack of representation. I mean, literally across I mean, from politics to medicine to all these different major areas that touch our life. And then you talked about exclusion from your native roots. Man, you know, many African Americans, when they go to Africa and really start talking to Africans, that's when we really start having the conversations, because prior to that, we're indoctrinated to think that the Africans don't like us, and they've been indoctrinated to think that we don't like them. And then when we do come together, we do give off those vibes. And so it's just wondering that I'm seeing these similar patterns across these communities of color, and it can't be coincidental. So I just want to put a pin right there, and then we go to the next question, and we can talk about this towards the end. So yeah, I'll give my own self a pat on the back for that one, because we're going to talk about that later. All right, go ahead with the next question.
That's one thing I was going to mention. That's one thing I was going to mention was, right, I think there's two issues that would be like the largest impediments towards the future for our community. One would be definitely reconciling this tactic that has been used by the dominant culture here to, one, separate us and pin us against ourselves, but as well to pin us against other communities that share our experience here. So I think that was the big one of the biggest ones, and the second one is the reconciliation that the United States of America would have to have within itself to recognize that the cultural shift it has to happen. Like I said, by 2050, hopefully we're all gonna be working professionals at that time, and right, you better get used to hearing some Spanish, right? Don't let it don't get afraid when you hear Spanish, and right right? If we look at Latin America is almost every single country below, right? Almost every single country south of the United States. And I always talk about it as like the United States is the next Latin American country. They better be ready for it. So this reckoning that the United States of America will have to have within itself of recognizing that.
Yeah. So Tomas, I'm so proud of him to call him a pure mind, because he keeps dropping these gems. Something that Dr. Key always says is that not all skin folk are kinfolk. And I think that, you know, that dilutes through a lot of communities of color. But I'm going to pass it on to someone that I do consider a brother. Pass it on to Amir.
Thank you, Cruz. I appreciate that. So my set of questions. So my first one is, what are some common myths about brown people?
I feel like we touched on it earlier of, you know, that we don't pay taxes, that undocumented people don't pay taxes, that we're taking the jobs. I think those are the big misconceptions that we have already debunked. But Asa?
Yeah, I was gonna say there's definitely plenty, right? We're definitely a diverse community, but you know, some that really stick out. One would be kind of like Tomas had said, even my own experience growing up, right? That we all speak Spanish. That's not true, right? And just because you don't speak Spanish doesn't mean you're not part of our culture or identity. Right? That you're Mexican, specifically Mexican. There are plenty of people of our community that are not Mexican, right? Plenty who are not Mexican. Right? Those are two big ones, right? So make sure when we're out, we don't call the Latinx population Mexican or assume that they speak Spanish. I used to hate that growing up. People just come up to me, start speaking Spanish. It's like, I'm not your, I don't know you, so don't come up to me trying to practice your Spanish. Get on with that, go somewhere else. Go take that back to Spanish class. But right, I said that to them, I don't come up to you starting to speak German. What? You try to practice my German on you? But yeah, I mean, those are two big ones. And then, you know, maybe just one around food. Not all people like spicy food, right? Not all Latinx people like spicy food. And that's one that my wife mentions frequently. I don't like spicy food.
Kind of to touch, well, I mean, we already kind of did touch the kind of common, the modern myths and misconceptions of Latino people, such as we don't pay taxes, you know, we're stealing jobs and this and that, which is clearly false. But kind of tying down what has been taught in history books and what you might have heard in your world history class, seminar, whatever the fact, you know, in any level. But basically kind of, well, I'll speak for the Aztec people because I have, you know, large expertise in that. This is the Tierra del Sol, by the way, in case you were wondering. It's the Aztec, it's basically like our God, well, like the Aztec God. You know, I'm Catholic, but still I tie my, beliefs and whatnot spiritually to my roots as well. And I will explain too shortly kind of how everything is tied in. But basically with the Aztec people, we always hear that they're savages, human sacrifices on the tops of pyramids during certain times. We hear just these bloody warriors and whatnot. First of all, I want to establish that almost every kingdom or large population of people has had its warriors, and there have been conflicts throughout the world. And I just want to kind of keep it known that prior to Spanish colonization and colonization period, and this probably goes with in Africa as well, there was already established knowledge, as far as mathematics, like the Mayas, and Aztecs, if you look, I mean, I shouldn't even have to explain. If you pick up the textbook while you're listening to the lecture, you can be like, excuse me, take a look at the picture and notice how intricate and how precise these measurements are. These structures would be able to withstand all kinds of things, and they're still remaining today. So how can we be mindless savages if we made such contributions to math? Native Americans were some of the first people, I forgot which tribe it was, but to perform the first open heart surgery. And, there's all kinds of theories, the Bering Strait theory, that all native people and whatnot come from Asia and whatnot, but that's not true, because in Chile, I forgot what the rain, but there's some rains over there, and that is our proof, like, I think it was about like 3,000 years ago or something or like 5,000 that they said that allegedly, the Asian people came through, and that's how all of us, native people, because, I'm part native too. I'm not just, like we said earlier, we're not Spanish. I mean, we got that in our blood, but we're also native as well. But like I was saying, that was like 5,000 years ago. But if you look 1,300 years ago, or 13,000 years ago, the ruins were still there. In Tabasco, there's an Olmec statue. You've probably seen, it's kind of a large head figure. Basically, if you just look at it, how the eyes, lips, and everything is just carved out. And like I said, the designing, geometry, measurements, angles, all of that is just so precise. And all of these things and creations were made before that happened, before the colonization happened. So I just want to put it out there. And, if you look at it, a lot of countries have, like, for example, the Europe, because we hear about Europe really, like it's just this elegant and, nice place. And I'm not no disrespect to them, because there are some nice contributions, like, for example, to, arts, philosophy and everything, but just as there are down here too. And that takes me to the gods, like we don't worship, my indigenous people, they don't worship, every god, all these gods, if anything, some, I think, believe, trying to remember what my uncles told me, because he really has studied the culture. And actually I know, and luckily me growing up, I had connections to indigenous people. Doña Celia Perez Booth holds the Peace and Dignity ceremony every Indigenous Peoples Day, Columbus Day. We don't call it that, Indigenous Peoples Day. We hold that. We have sweat lodges and whatnot. So I was always there to connect myself with the culture, but I'm just trying to remember. But basically, like I was saying, I think I heard supposedly we were spiritual, but they were agnostic. They didn't really believe. Like, it was just symbolism. There's a lot of symbolism in the culture, and that can also be a misconception. But like I was saying, if you look at what the Polish and German people did to the Jewish people, that was a massacre. They killed, that was I don't know if it's the large, but it was really large. There's killings that happen over there to establish kingdoms and whatnot. And, I also wanted to point out too, I don't have a lot of expertise, but I know some things, like, for example, in Africa, how kingdoms were organized and established. Mansa Musa, the richest man, ever to this day. If you look at that man's palace, the pillars, everything, that will explain to you enough that prior to colonization, and I forgot what part of Africa that was, that they were already established and had their own practices and whatnot. But I just want to say that too, that kind of the reason why a lot of Latino people, it's a broad topic, I'm just going to keep it like this for now, what I know about in Mexico with Aztecs, but socialism is really prevalent. And that was also a passed down belief from, the Aztec beliefs and whatnot. We're unified, we're a people. The community is responsible for the birth. It takes a village to raise a child, basically. We don't just send them off, and just care about the money, like capitalism has kind of really shown us. But I could go on. Basically, that's just what I want to say. That's a myth. We're not savages. We're not worshiping everything that there is. We just tend to have a lot of respect for things. And just because we have respect mean, you know, I'm getting disrespected for treating something with respect. It's kind of really mind-blowing. I want to put that out there.
There's a couple things I wanted to highlight what Thomas was saying, because it was so powerful. The first one was, right, when we have this dominant culture that can't explain how these structures were erected, like in Egypt or throughout Latin America, right? When they can't figure it out, how do they do this? It must have been an alien. It had to be aliens. What? It's like that. Okay, you just disregarded all of our achievements and all of our knowledge and shut it up. There's no possible way it had to be an alien. But there's that. And then there was another thing that Thomas was talking about, right? He had mentioned human sacrifice, but I want to put that into perspective. And one of the greatest perspectives that I learned when I was living in Mexico was, right, not necessarily human sacrifice, but the perception that the Aztecs specifically had around blood, right? They knew that blood is one thing that you cannot live without, right? If you do not have blood, you will cease to exist, right? You will cease to live on Earth. So they held blood as one of the most precious things that they had, right? And that was some of the tying into to either bloodletting or sacrifices. But I share that on how they seen blood or how high of a value it was, because I was reading literature and they said when the Spanish came, the complete massacre of communities that these right colonizers did, they were blown away. Just the complete lack of respect for blood, the complete lack of respect for life, right? Just like Thomas was saying, right? Every culture has wars, but for them, in the literature I read, it's like this was a new phenomenon for them. It was this complete lack of acknowledgement and respect for that. But one last thing, right? Just taking this to a conversation Thomas was sharing about socialism. Like I said, when I moved to Mexico, I found out healthcare was available, accessible, and free. And, you know, it's just baffling. It's baffling. It's like, how do we live in the wealthiest country, but yet it's so inaccessible? It's so expensive. But, you know, I'm gonna leave that to Dr. Kent Key. No, please.
I will say this, Asa, like when I went to Cuba to do part of my fellowship with Robert Woods Johnson Foundation, they have an excellent healthcare system there. It is totally free. As well as they have medical schools there that are totally free. You don't even have to pay tuition. And we have groups that come from the United States that go over there for medical school. Of course, but you have to sign a contract that once you finish your 5th year, because they do 5 years, once you finish your 5th year of medical school and graduate, you have to return back to the same community in the United States that you come from. And that's part of the culture. It's because you have to understand that the relationships within the culture, within the village, are the most precious. And so they know that you would know the people would know you, and you would have these relationships. There's this social capital piece that's there. And that is also a piece of why in Cuba, they don't have it as a medical school. Like there's the Ministry of Public Health. And under the Ministry of Public Health in their government is public health. And public health encompasses medicine or medical school, as well as social work and all of these other things. But everyone is trained in public health. So when the doctor comes to your home in Cuba, they're not just treating you for your symptoms. They're also looking around for like black mold and other environmental factors that impact health that our medical doctors don't do in the United States. But yeah, it is a phenomenon, Asa, when you go outside of the US and see how other countries are doing healthcare, and we're supposed to be the most resourceful, richest countries in the world, and how we are failing like tremendously. It is definitely something to talk about. And then I just want to say, Asa, not only with the monuments you were talking about, but they say the same thing about the Haramket, which we're taught is the Sphinx, which isn't the original name.
Sphinx is a Greek word. That's a Greek word.
and the pyramids. They said that that could not have been people. And we know that that was, we call it Egypt now, but it's modern day Kemet. And the reason why many of the attributes have been stripped and given Greek names such as Egypt was because they did not want the world to know that this was done by Africans, because Africans were supposed to be the dark continent. They weren't supposed to be smart enough to do this. And that's why the Haramket or the Sphinx nose was blown up by Napoleon, because they didn't want it to have those African features. So we can talk about a lot of this. I call it the miseducation. I love Lauryn Hill's CD, The Miseducation, but she got that from Dr. Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro, and it talks about a lot of these things. So a lot of what you're saying, again, we see a lot of parallels of what has been happening in the diaspora with coming from Africa, and as we migrated various parts of the world. So I'm gonna put a pin there and go back to our hosts.
Okay, so you can obviously see, from the conversation we just had, a lot of history books and the curriculum in schools and that type of stuff, they don't go into the meat or the deeper concepts of all this stuff that we're talking about now, and they only go on the surface of things and they don't try to dive deeper down. So wonderful points. Next is there a division within the Brown community, and what factors contribute to it?
Vanessa, do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. Well, I mean, like the little bit that I kind of observed is kind of going back to what Tomas and Asa said, that Tomas said the thing about the Selena movie, where it says you have to be more Mexican than Mexicans and more American than Americans, and that's very true. That's a feeling that people get, especially Mexican Americans. But then just kind of going back to what Asa said about if you label every Latino Mexican, obviously people are going to get upset because not everyone is Mexican, and there's a lot of Latinos, a lot of Latino countries that have a lot of rich culture too, that has similar but very different aspects to who they are, how they identify, how they live their life, and all of this stuff. So just when you get people like Donald Trump who what's that called? Categorize everyone as Mexican, who categorizes everyone as being this, and that, then people start to get upset, and then that creates an even bigger divide in what we should do. We should honestly just come together and say, no. First of all, not everyone is Mexican. Second of all, you're completely wrong with all of your statements that you said, because here's how we've contributed to the U.S. Here's how we have come together and made an impact in what the lives that we have now, that we lead, and what we want to have for the future. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that's big, right? Because you can even hear it, right? They say, right, all these immigrants coming from all these Mexican countries. Mexico is one country, right? It's one country, but I mean that's the biggest thing, right? Is to recognize our impact, but beyond just the surface level, right? Because you can literally go to like our state gov website, Michigan.gov, and you can see the economic impact in our state that the Latinx population alone has, and that the immigration population alone has, and that's huge, right? They know that information. Right, that's the most baffling part about it, right? These powers that be know the information, they know there's benefit, but at the same time, right, the lack of representation, the lack of inclusivity, all of it is missing, but for sure.
Well, that's a powerful statement, because a couple of years ago, when the rhetoric was that you were going to have all of these bad people coming in from the caravans were coming, right? And so we were at the American Public Health Association, the conference in San Diego. So we went down to Tijuana, and we were down there on the beaches with the mean, evil caravans who were not mean, evil people. These were regular families just doing what they do. And so they were not murderers. They were not rapists. They were none of these things. And again, this is, again, a pattern, because that's often how they refer to both Black and brown people. Murderers, rapists, all of these things. And again, these are patterns. And so we may have to talk about some systemic things on another show, because again, we're seeing these patterns. So I'm gonna pivot because we have a couple more questions that we want to get to before we run out of time. But this has been such a wonderful educational discussion, even just learning from this cultural perspective from the Latin community. Go ahead, who with the next question?
Okay, the next question is, so do you believe colorism is prevalent in the Latino community? And you know, I understand we already talked about this, but would you like to expand on it a little bit more?
One big example of it was in the movie Roma. I don't know if you guys have seen it. Yalitza, she was the lead, and she was the Oscar's first Indigenous Mexican nominee. Like, absolutely incredible. Yet within our community, there were the people who were lighter in skin. They were criticizing her, telling her she didn't deserve it, she wasn't good enough just because she had a darker tone in her skin. And it's kind of sad because we're here in America trying to get everyone to become allies, to say, hey, look, we have really awesome things to offer. We're trying to gain their respect, yet within our own community, within our own culture, we are fighting. There's a division, and it's just really sad to see. And it's important to talk about, even within our families, with our friends, to call it out and say, hey, this is a really real thing. So
for sure, colorism is definitely an issue, and I think it's right. The United States has definitely pushed, or not even right. There's multiple powers that be that have pushed that this whiteness is the ideal of beauty, and I think that exists globally, right? That misconception has been indoctrinated globally. But I mean, there's even right in the United States, in the Latinx population, it exists. Colorism definitely exists, right? Vanessa talked about it earlier, almost like the erasure, right? The complete disregard for Afro-Latinos, like they don't exist in our culture. But even further, right? I know from my experience in Mexico, I've seen that colorism exists there as well. And there's like this whole issue around class, right? That class that is attached to colorism, right? Because one, there was almost everybody in Mexico was brown. So I mean, take it back, right? Because Donald Trump referred to everybody as rapists or murderers. You go to Mexico, it's like, this can't be true. Literally everybody I'm looking at can't be rapists or murderers. So I mean, that would just destroy that whole argument. But there's this thing that's attached to it, whereas, right, if you're working in an office, right, you're probably not outside all day. If you have a laboring job, you're probably outside and your skin will be darker because you are taking in all that wonderful vitamin D. But, right, so colorism exists there around class. And that's, there's multiple different factors, but it's an issue. It's an issue.
Kind of briefly add to how there is a lot of African culture. I want to touch on it real quick briefly because I know we're on a time limit, but that there is a lot of African culture within our roots. Like, for example, kind of like a sub-religion called Santeria. It's basically voodoo, but Cuban kind of. Now, I'm not going to go into deep details because I don't want to be ignorant myself, but I know there's positive in that. In me, I have my own religious, spiritual beliefs, so I just kind of stay on my own lane. But I just want to say that with that, there's a lot of ties with there, with music, for example. I don't know if you ever heard the cumbia. That's, for example, Selena or, stuff like that. That's probably what everyone pretty much here knows about. I'll just use her as an example. But basically, the cumbia, now it has origins in Colombia, but it goes from Colombia to Africa. Certain tribal dances and whatnot. The beat, now I'm about to get my hat on right now. Get it on, like Montel Jordan. But anyhow, I just want to say, that we have the African roots with like the rhythm and the dance. Pretty much African roots are like in dang near every they made music, the African people. So I just wanted to point that out, and like to touch with the indigenous people, that they're mostly darker skinned, the indigenous people, and kind of the appropriation that happens within our own community. The corn tortillas that people in Mexico eat, the food, the beans and all of that. Those were all harvested, and during the early days before colonization, those all birthed from the indigenous people. So we're going to accept their food, accept how they're giving our culture and creative ideas how to feed ourselves and whatnot, but we're going to treat them really bad, and put them in the lower class. I think that's that's a farce as well, you know. But you know, just with the contributions with food, music, culture, you know, because there were dark people that were building the pyramids too, you know. I want you to know that, and the monuments and statues that coming up with math and these intricate cities and raised garden beds, they were all dark, you know. So we need to appreciate them, because without them, we wouldn't even be here. You know, we wouldn't have all these contributions as a society as a whole. We wouldn't be taking out. There wouldn't be nothing. Nothing. There wouldn't be no U.S. Citizens Bank Tower up there. It'd be nothing. Just grass and trees, you know. There would be no U of M Flint College. There would be none of that. So, you know, just you gotta show appreciation. Whether it be the people in Egypt, the people in Tecnolitan, wherever. Shoot, even here, the people that used to, the land that were actually stole, everybody here in America stole right here. All, you know, ain't no Detroit, you know, or Flint. It was all whatever original names they had then. But I just want to point that out.
Right? If you do not know, we live in a state called Michigan or Michigan. In Mexico, there is a state called Michoacan. Wait a minute. Michoacan, Michigan, these are indigenous names, and they sound way too familiar, and the indigenous population is connected, right? These are the native people of America, right? Commonalities, these are similar cultures. And who taught them how to survive, right? When these colonizers came, how did they survive? Somebody taught them how to harvest these crops, because they wasn't ready. So glad Thanksgiving's coming around. Talk about that again.
Okay, very good points. Very good points. Next question is, how does mental health and machismo affect the Latinx community?
Yeah, that's an issue. This is definitely dominant, right? Dominant, oppressive cultures across the spectrum of different identities. In the Latinx culture, right? Machismo, right? This dominant, oppressive male culture exists, and it's an issue. It's an issue. Mental health, if we look at it as a local perspective, that access is an issue. The perception of it is an issue. You know, it's always alarming when we have Spanish speakers come to the center and they want to get, they're looking for these services, and they're just non-existent in Genesee County, right? It's like, I can't connect you with a therapist or a mental health professional because there's either so few or none, right? And it's troubling. It's troubling. Representation is important.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think in many cultures, the idea that men have to repress all their feelings is very big. And as far as the mental health goes, I feel like and from my experience, I'm Mexican in my culture, I feel like the awareness of mental health is like, no. Like when, for example, if I go to a parent, and I'm like, you know, I'm not feeling it, ponte las pilas, you know, like you have to, you know, and I feel like slowly parents, and especially our generation, this generation is bringing more awareness to anxiety, to depression. And it's really important because, it's just, we need that support, especially with Latina, especially with people of color. They need that support mentally, emotionally, and for them to not have that support there, those therapists there to guide them is, you know, it needs to change.
Oh, absolutely, right? If I'm right now looking for a mental health professional, so if there's anybody out there who knows of somebody, I studied psychology. It's important to practice therapy. It's important. You can't navigate it alone. You need somebody to guide you. But right, I want to connect with somebody that is going to understand my experience. Representation is important, right? Representation is important. But I would encourage all of you to look up the feminist movement in Latin America. That's a powerful movement, but they've also a serious struggle and just alarming crisis of the complete lack of supportive institutions to investigate homicides and just the complete victimization, the complete abuse of females down there. But look up the feminist movement in Latin America. If you don't know about it, that's a powerful movement. And I love how people protest in Latin America because they will shut it down. They shut it down. And when I was down there, I said, oh yes, they protest on a whole nother level. Take some notes. I don't know if Vanessa wants to say anything. I don't want to call her out, but.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quick, with the whole machismo thing, just suppressing the women in Latin America from doing anything. So like, like males are the ones that have to provide everything. They're the ones that bring the bacon home or whatever the expression is. So anytime that like someone wants to, a female wants to be a lawyer, be a doctor, do something, they're like, no, you're gonna stay home and you're gonna clean, you're gonna cook, you're gonna do all the things that women have to do. So there's a lot of things that like we're limited on being able to do, but like women are really, really smart and they can be anything. They just recently with this whole voting thing, like Latinas in Michigan and were a big percentage of the vote. They were the ones that voted for the right candidate. So, women's vote counts. And if we have men constantly, saying like, oh, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's really, it can have a toll on mental health in that avenue as well. But yeah, what Alondra was saying that, that it's mental health in Latin America is kind of seen as, oh, you're being lazy, you're not putting in all of the work that you're supposed to. If you feel down or if you feel bad, go do something, like keep busy. Like there's no excuse for not doing anything. So I think that's one of the things that and again, kind of going with what Asa said, having that representation, having that ability to just have a resources to say, oh, well, here's a therapist that you can talk to or something. That I think that's something that it still has to be talked about so that we can move forward and say, well, these are solutions to, having lack of representation or, having the ability to go to a therapist or having it not seem as this whole taboo thing. But yeah.
Quickly, just
Oh, my
Vanessa,
bad.
sorry. I think a big reason why our culture is so like you're being lazy if you don't feel like doing this or is because they came here with absolutely nothing. They left their families and everything they owned in their countries, and they came here and they had no choice but to work as hard as they could so they could keep their families alive, so they could feed their families, so they could provide a shelter for them. So if you think about it that way, our parents, like, they went through all this, so like no wonder they're like, you got to keep going, you got to keep pushing, because they had no other choice. They had to feed their children, they had to feed their family. So
kind of to top it off real quick, kind of what our dynamic brown and black people have been saying here today. Basically, I think we just need to take a re-examination of our way of living and our habits, erase a lot of things and rewrite it, and kind of go back to based off what our native ancestors practice. Because the women, and like I said, Celia Perez Booth, she's like an Aztec. Her husband was, rest his soul, was a priest, Aztec priest, and now he just passed some of the roles on to her. We call Earth Mother Earth. Like we try to incorporate still the feminine titles to things that we live in life, and that's true. Earth, the nurture, the giver, the foundation. And I just really find it upset when not even just Latinos, but everybody degrades women because they brought us here. Every one of us, they brought us here. They nurtured the bond, the blood, and warmth. Like Asa said, the blood, really sacred. The mom, the blood, the baby comes to the mom for milk, for food, nurture, clothing, protection. But I know we're running out of time, kind of a time thing, but I just real quick want to get 4 more important questions that I want to discuss, and then we can close out for the evening for you today. So I just want to say, why don't immigrants simply apply for citizenship instead of coming here illegally? I know it's a large one, so I want to hear what my dynamic brown people had to say.
Because it's not possible. Is literally, it's not possible. If you know anything about the immigration system, it's not possible. It's not a possibility. I don't know how to say it any other way. You have to have. My wife's family is from Mexico. My wife is from Mexico. We got married here in the United States. We wanted to invite her family to come watch us get married. They could not come attend. You, to even come visit as a tourist in the United States, you have to apply for permission, right? You have to apply for permission. It's called a visa. I said, I want to go visit the United States and I have to get permission before I can go. I said, okay, well, what do you need? He said, you better have a career, not a job, but a career. Do you have money in the bank? How much money in the bank do you got? Do you own a house? They want to make sure that you are established, because if you're not established, they're not going to give you permission. There's global politics to it, and it's literally not possible. It's so difficult, right? If you do not meet these standards, then you can't be an immigrant to the United States. So when they talk about why don't they just apply for citizenship, it's not possible. And one, if you are here, if you came into the country without the legal permission, right, which is a misdemeanor offense, make sure that's highlighted. It is a misdemeanor offense to come here without legal permission. So to put people in jail or cages for a misdemeanor offense is ridiculous. Is ridiculous. But if you come here without the legal permission, at that point, it is legally impossible. It's impossible for you to ever be here legally. It's not possible. It doesn't exist.
Yeah,
I don't know how to say it in other ways.
Adding on to what Asa said, my family, we came here when I was 4 years old, and we did the tourist visas. So I guess, quote unquote, we did it how it's supposed to be. But even then, it took us 13 years to even get our citizenship. Most families don't have 13 years, let alone the money that it took. These families, some of them are being threatened, life threatened. They don't have food. They don't have anything to provide for their families. They have no choice but to flee, and they're willing to risk it all so that their family could have a dinner, so they can have food, so they can have a place to sleep. A lot of families don't have the time, they don't have the money, they don't have 13 years. They can't risk that.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of similar to what Alondra was saying. If I'm a teenage boy in Honduras and Guatemala, I'd rather risk my life trying to come to the U.S. Illegally and try to have a better life for myself than stay in these countries where I'm going to be forced to be in a gang, or if I refuse to join, they're going to kill me. They're going to kill all of my family. So for me, as in that perspective, I'd rather do all of the migration from my home country through Mexico up into the U.S. to just even get a chance of having a better life. Because like Alondra said, we don't have time to wait however many days, months, years for the U.S. to say, oh, okay, well, we'll consider you to have some type of visa or something. There's no time for us to wait. We have to think about our families. We have to think about our own well-being, and sometimes, we don't even think about making the decision. We just make it and just start our journey, quote unquote.
Some wonderful. Or Alondra, were you going to say something? You can go on if you'd like. Floor is yours.
No,
Oh.
you.
No, go ahead. No, I'm the moderator now. I'm the Don Lennon, Chris Cuomo. You can go ahead now.
My mic was just unmuted. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to take it to our next question here. So, what adverse experiences and mistreatment do brown people face in healthcare?
I mean, the most alarming issue that pops into my mind immediately is what's currently in the national news, which, again, I always tie these similarities to. These are historic issues for this country, and they continue to exist. But what has currently happened with females in the detention centers, right? These forced hysterectomies without consent or without permission. The sterilization of our community, historic issues that continue to exist today, right? I feel like a record right here, broken record, just keep on repeating it, right? These are issues that happened in the past, and they continue to happen now. If we know history, if we are not denied history, then we would be able to recognize that a little bit easier.
Also, not having healthcare providers that understand, one, the language barrier. That's a huge one. Because imagine even someone who speaks English, they have a hard trouble expressing exactly what they're feeling so that they can get the proper medication. So imagine when you have that barrier there, you know, misconceptions happen just on that alone, but also trusting a medical health provider that they have your best interest at heart, that they are giving you the right medication, that they're giving you the right treatment. There's a lot of mistrust. So that is why we go back to the representation. You know, there has to be someone that they can trust, because they're literally putting their lives in their hands.
Right, unless do you understand my experience? Do you understand my culture, my language, and what I eat? Just like I'm looking for a mental health professional, I'm looking for a physician as well. Shout out, because I just got health insurance. I'm looking for a physician, but it's the same thing. If someone's gonna give me a nutrition plan, are they gonna understand what I eat? Don't prescribe to me bread, because I don't eat bread, right? I don't even got that in the house, but same thing, representation.
And then the same thing, if I'm an immigrant and I don't have any type of legal documents, I'm afraid for my life to go to the doctor, because then the doctor is gonna say, "Oh, look, we have an illegal here. Take him back." So I'd rather just put up with all of my pain that I'm having, whether I'm dying or not, whether I know it or not, because I don't want to be sent back. Again, because what Alondra said, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I can trust the system to give me the right medication, or to not send me away because I'm not a citizen of the U.S. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things, is that immigrants have they have zero to little access to any healthcare in the U.S.
Asa, anybody else, Asa, Alondra, or Mrs. Hall? Would you like to add anything?
Oh, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Just building on the points that were just mentioned, these issues with the healthcare system, then, you know, they pave the way for the underlying disparities that happen when we have a pandemic, you know, within public health, like COVID-19. And then, you know, the grief and things like that. People are overwhelmed. People are dealing with mental health crises. And that, once again, the lack of culturally competent providers. So it's just going full circle. I just wanted to throw that in there as an epidemiologist.
Anybody else would like to add anything on to it? Floor is open.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you've ever maybe anybody on Facebook, man, ever heard me speak, but right, it's an issue that we talk about frequently, just because it is so alarming, right? When we look at the experiences of our local community members, and the negative experience and the impact that has on health, is wild. It's unimaginable. It's alarming, right? And we should be actively, as a community, working to address these issues. But there's so many different barriers, right? The culture, the language, immigration status, the historic experiences, but all of these things. And then when they're really put into perspective into, when we understand people's experiences or their stories, then, right, you know, empathy isn't even an issue. It's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Now I understand why culture and language barriers are an issue and why we should do something about them. But no, for sure, it's alarming, right? There should not be such pressure or such weight put on individuals or families when we have these large institutions, right? Literally, Flint alone is known for their healthcare system, right? We have great healthcare here. We have great health. We're known for it. I mean, it's fantastic. But the barriers that exist and the negative situations that happen is alarming, right? It's alarming.
And that gets into systemic issues, whether it's systemic racism, whether it's classism, and so many other issues around access. And you normally see patterns of this around communities of color. And it doesn't matter what state you're in or what city. If you have communities of color, you're going to see these same systemic issues. And so it's kind of like a pattern that we'll discuss a little bit later in another talk show.
All right. Well, thank you. Had some very powerful and impacting, good, good discussions, but then not so good. I mean, they were great, but what we were talking about it just brings the reality. That's what I'm all about: authenticity and reality, and that's what us as leaders will have to be. We'll have to break the bad news to people, let them know the reality, so then they can make them want to change. Make you want to change your community. And unfortunately, I think a lot of these issues take place far from us. On the border here and there, which they do. But they take place everywhere, even in our own community. I know with the Flint water crisis, for example, a lot of Latino, brown people had a lot of issues, getting connections to the resources, whether it be, doctors, where to get lead tested and whatnot. And a lot of people, that was a large concern and question I've heard, where, they want to get help, but then again, like Vanessa said, oh, there's an illegal, there's an alien, take them out. You're gonna get that again. You're gonna get the hate and racism proven to you, right to you in a hard way. Children come home, mom and dad are not there no more. Abuela is gone. Whoever you came here with, they're gone now. And then you might be next, unfortunately. So I just wanted to put that out there too in our own community. But luckily, we have great leaders, organizational leaders like Dr. Key and Ms. Dodson and Ms. Hall and the Flint Registry here to help break that barrier. Be the bulldozer of justice to break down and deliver that equality to everybody, because we're getting information out bilingually, not, requiring in certain like forms, are you legal or not? We're just helping you out and trying to connect you. But I know we're running out of time, so this brings me to our concluding question of the evening. I want to really get it in there, but why is bilingual curriculum and implementing culture within it important, and how is it represented in the United States school system? Thank you.
To answer this question by jumping back to the last question, right? Even if we look at areas where there's cities where the dominant or the major culture is the Latinx population, like looking at like South California, right? Like places like Los Angeles, where there's this huge population of the Latinx population. But if you look at the medical field, it's like 3% are medical professionals from that culture, and it's like that's a huge gap in people that are able to understand the culture, language, or immigration barriers there. This is why, that's one reason why bilingual education is important. Like I said, in 2050, the United States Census Bureau, right? Not somebody from the Latinx organization. Literally, the U.S. Census Bureau said, right, this ethnic community will be 25% of the overall population quickly, right? It is growing rapidly. If we look at the health disparities that exist today, right, here even locally in Flint, right, in Flint, we're like 4% of the population, just under 4% of the population. And we recognize the barriers that exist now. If we look at 2050, we know that these issues are good. They're not gonna magically go away. So, if we look at the trend, if we look at the curve, they're either gonna get worse, they're gonna get better, or, right? We know what's gonna happen. We can predict what's gonna happen. But just said mental health, all of these fields, every single field, everything, just, y'all know this, right? What is public health? We need all of these professionals to have this cultural understanding and these language capacity, right? This capability. That's one thing. But I think if we look right long term, right, there's an economic benefit to being bilingual, right? If we live in a capitalistic country, there's an economic benefit to being bilingual, right? Our largest trade partner is Latin America, right? We do a lot of business with Latin America. And if we know what language is the dominant language of Latin America, is Spanish. It's like they're already a huge right, trade partner. So we should recognize that, there's more people that speak Spanish than English. Recognize the economics to it. If that's our huge focus as a country, let's look at it, right? Let's not, let's not be so dominant on English only, right? I understand that here, right, there's a history there of securing our economic security by pushing English only, but globalism is happening regardless, right? We can do something about it or we're gonna get left behind. But I'm gonna leave it to the other panelists too.
Yeah, I'd say even just as a community or as like a family kind of scope, being able to help out my kids understand what they're learning in school. So like if my kid is having issues with a specific subject, I'm able to help them out, or I'm able to receive information that will help my kids succeed in school, because ultimately I want them to, graduate high school. I want them to go to college. I want them to, have a career and stuff. And if I can't help, then how are we all supposed to kind of, get together so that we're able to help them out? So I think, just even aiding, just the kids or their parents together is really important, again, because then we're able to succeed. And then if I'm, as a parent, if I'm involved in my kid's life, then that just pushes them forward to continue to wanting to succeed. And so having an education, I think, or a bilingual education, is really important in those aspects, at least for me.
Absolutely.
Just to add on, what I've noticed when I would go to the airports in Mexico, almost the majority, they speak English to accommodate the Americans coming into their country. Yeah, when I come back to America, into the airports, I mean, very little workers actually speak Spanish. And I mean, there's a lot of Spanish-speaking people that are coming to America, but yet the workers, they don't speak Spanish. Everything's in English. So by starting just in the school systems, providing that bilingual education, not only is it going to benefit in the long term, but the brains, there's so many great benefits to being bilingual for the brain, the prefrontal cortex. Like, it's just a win-win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. When we talk about globalization, like, the more you go to other countries and see, you realize that if you've only been in America, and more importantly, if you've only been right here in Flint and haven't gone out to experience anything else, you will realize that what we see in America is not the reality, right? At one point in time, a couple of years ago, I think they said only like 18% of Americans even own passports, right? So that means like the other 72% or 82% literally thinks the world is what we see here, and it's so different. And so that's the wonderful thing about public health and this show, is that it allows us to talk about different cultural perspectives. I see your passport, Cruz. I got one too. It allows us to talk about health, because health is more than just the absence of illness and disease. That's not, just because you're not ill or don't have a physical disease, it still doesn't mean that you're healthy. So when we talk about cultural health, economic health, when we talk about mental health, when we talk about all of these other aspects, it is so critically important. And just so you guys know, we've been getting a lot of comments on social media, on the platforms, and there was a comment left to you all from Mr. Clifton Kirkman. He said he's enjoyed the show and this conversation. It is so important to dive in and understand each other as Black and Brown communities and Black and Brown people, because we share more similarities than we often realize, and just to keep up the outstanding work. So just want you to know that this conversation is resonating. So to the rest of the interns that are on here, most of our public health interns that are not of Latin or Hispanic descent, we were kind of learning. This was like an educational piece for them. Can you, if you want to just kind of sum up in one word what you feel, what you get from this conversation, just kind of, chime in, and whether you're a mentor or an intern, just kind of chime in. For me, I feel empowered, because I feel a stronger sense of kinship between Black and Brown communities. So for me, it's more of an empowerment or a kinship. Anybody else want to kind of give a reaction? Because we're running out of time. I really would like to just hear everyone talk, but I know some people need to get off, because we've been on almost for an hour and a half or a little bit more. So Go ahead.
I agree with you, Dr. Key, that it is like listening to everyone speak. It's so many similarities that we really need to start sticking together. If the Black and brown communities would stick together, we would be so powerful that no one would be able to stop us, you know. But I feel like a lot of times people don't stick together. But I learned so much today, and I appreciate you guys for coming in and speaking. This was very, very, for me, it was a big inspiration because I learned so much. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Monisha. Who else want to come?
For me, it's heightening my awareness. I'm always welcoming an opportunity to learn more, especially when it's about different people from me. And so I appreciated this.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just like to echo the words of my colleagues and my mentors, which is just to say that this has been a very empowering and enlightening experience for me, just to be able to hear, as they said, the similarities between our communities and our struggles and how intertwined. This is why one of the conversations that I very adamantly uplift in our organization is intersectionality. And I find that to be so important because of conversations like this, because these things are overlapping and are occurring simultaneously. And it's important for us to acknowledge that in order to be effective in our fight towards progressive ideals and progress in general. So as I said, I'm very thankful to have heard you all speak on your experiences. And as they also said, a lot of what you all spoke about, I was unaware of previous to now. So once again, thank you. And we were happy to have you.
Anyone else? Any other interns or mentors, mentees?
I want to kind of echo what everyone else is saying. Thank you all so much for being here. One specific thing that is going to stick with me is that we kind of have a responsibility at this point, especially for in public health, to be bilingual, to be multilingual, and specifically to have it kind of align with the way our population is changing here. So that's something I'll be checking out the center, taking classes and things like that. And then again, another thing was the kind of along with the language barrier, because not everyone is going to, do that or do it right now. There are kids who need mentors, who need tutors, who are first generation, who, whether you're Black or brown, like we said, we got to look out for one another. So it's kind of coming full circle. And again, thank you all for being here and just sharing wisdom with us.
All right, anyone else?
There's so much more I want to add. I appreciate the platform to have this discussion, but there's literally so much. Even just that last question, like I'm a big advocate for it, just because I think it's a solution to so many different things. But
I think some of our interns, Asa was saying that the conversation is so rich and there's so much to learn. We may have to do a part 2 of this and maybe even expand the dialogue. And so I think that's what we probably will eventually go that route. Everett Grams, he has in the chat, thank you all for being here. Like everyone has said, he's learned so much. And I think that's pretty much the sentiment of our entire group. So on behalf of the Flint Public Health Youth Academy, we want to first thank our panelists, and we want to also thank our social media audience that comes and supports us. We will be here again Friday after next. We do our talk shows every other Friday live on Facebook at 6:30. We will be having a talk show to kind of give reactions to the election at the next one. And so, and we've been covering a lot of major stuff, from the COVID-19 to the reopening of schools to, you name it, intersectionality. We've talked about a gamut of things, and most of our focus is on social justice, health disparities and health inequities, and then also stuff related to COVID. But we're also looking at hot topics. So we want to infuse pop culture, music, history, and arts into what we do. So again, thank you all for joining us. We're so glad that you were able to share with us on this episode of A Youth Perspective, and we'll see you again Friday after next, same time, same place. Have a great evening.